Hey guys, happy Monday. This is our last ELA story of the year, and I actually just read this story for the first time over the weekend, and I have to say it's my favorite one of the entire year. Usually by the end of Unit 6, the year ends, and I never have gotten to read this story. You're really going to enjoy this one. And it's called Atlantis. And that's on page 502. I'm going to scoot up just a pinch. Now, this is a pretty long story, so I'm going to keep it moving along. But we are still going to go over our vocab words, and I'm going to ask less questions. Okay? So, before I start, this story... on page 502, it's called Atlantis, and it's called The Legend of the Lost City. And it's written and retold by Christina Billett. Now, this is actually probably one of my favorite stories of the year because of the genre. And the genre is actually called a legend. And a legend is a traditional story about people or land. The story may be based on truth, but it's mostly fiction, so mostly it's made up. Read to find out why the author calls the story a legend. So I'm just going to explain what a legend is a little bit more. So this is an old story, and it's passed on by word of mouth. You know, generation to generation, the story just keeps getting passed on, usually told. And what ends up happening over the years is the story begins to change a little bit. Because, the details that are added to the story each time it's told are different than the last person that told it. So you've definitely read legends or maybe listened to legends before. Maybe you've heard of the story of like Bigfoot, which is like a make-believe story, but it's a legend and it's a story that's been passed on. Paul Bunyan. Also even the story about George Washington and the apple tree and all that. Maybe you've heard all of those, but this one's a really good one. Now, the question of the week says, what is the best way to keep your freedom? Now, we're kind of talking about freedom. We're talking about America and all of these different things throughout the unit. But just so you know, your freedom as you get older especially is very important, because in order to keep your freedom, the best way to is just to follow the laws, okay, that are given to us, vote, right? Like eventually when you turn 16, you're going to be able to go and register to vote. And that's a great way to use and keep your freedom. Another one is to speak out, because you do have the right to speak out. And then I also think it's really important that you learn to work with everybody. And those things will definitely help keep your freedom, and it's the best way to keep your freedom. Okay, so we're going to move on to page 504. Now, before I start, there are some names in here that are going to seem very, wow, I've never heard those before. And the reason is because this story is a lot about, and it's called Greek mythology. So there's a lot of made up gods and goddesses that are in here. And the characters are actually really pretty cool. And I'm going to do my best with all the pronunciations of their names and stuff. So just bear with me and we'll try to get right through the story. All right. So page 504. First there was chaos. From chaos sprang earth and heaven. From them came the race of Titans. Two of them, Cronus and Rhea, seized power and ruled over all. Their son Zeus overthrew them. Then he and his brothers divided up the world. To Zeus went the heavens, to Hades the realms of the dead, while the seas and oceans went to the mighty Poseidon, who promised to guard the waters with care. Floating on one of Poseidon's emerald seas was a rocky island. Few visited its shores, and no one bothered to give it a name. But the sun rose warmly over it each morning and set sleepily behind it every night. Okay, so on that page, they kind of introduced some of these gods and goddesses. Now, maybe you've watched the movie before. It's called Hercules, and in the movie, there's Zeus, who is basically the god of, they call it the heavens, and then there's the Hades, who is god of the underworld, and then there's Poseidon, who is god of the sea. So there's all these different, characters who are in charge of their different areas. And just mind you that this is fictional, but it's fictional and it's mythology. So on page 505, it says, in the center of the island there stood a mountain, and at the foot of the mountain lived a man called Evanor and his wife, Leucippe. They lived happily together, working hard to tend the barren land, and brought up their daughter, Cleito, to honor all creatures. Now, we just had a word there, honor. Let me grab my vocab words. So we have to honor, and this just means to show respect to somebody. So like this boy must have won a medal. Maybe looks like maybe a sport that he was playing. So, people were honoring him as they put the medal on him. Okay? Okay, page 506. Poseidon grew curious. How could they be content with so little? He took on a human form and crouched, unseen behind a rock, to find out. Each morning at daybreak, he watched Cleito walk over the pebbled ground, barefoot and smiling, to fill her water pot at the stream. So you could see there, Poseidon's kind of hiding. He's crouching down, he's behind the rock, and he's just watching Cleito. Seeing Cleito in all her beauty, Poseidon's heart grew tender, and one day he stepped out from behind the rock to talk to her. Day after day he came, and slowly he began to return his love. Finally, she agreed to become his bride. Her parents, unaware of Poseidon's divinity, blessed the union, and a simple wedding followed. So they got married. Okay? There was 2 words on there. We have content. And content is just a fancy way of saying happy. Okay, so this girl on the chair, she looks pretty happy. She's content. She's satisfied. She's pleased. So there's nothing wrong. And then the other one, which is crouched, and that just means kind of to crouch down. It means that you are stooped down over your legs. So they're taking a picture. The man that's taking the picture right now is crouched down. Okay, moving on to page 508. It says, but a god cannot stay hidden. After the wedding, all the spirits of the sea rose to the surface to sing, and Poseidon assumed his divine form once more. He vowed to rebuild the island and make it fit for a king and his queen. Poseidon used powers beyond human imagining to transform the isle into a paradise. First, he arranged alternative circles of land and sea, 3 of land and 3 of water, to enclose the mountain. Within each circle of land, a forest sprang up. Trees bloomed and grew heavy with fruits, and creatures multiplied. Next, he made a network of canals fed by waterfalls. Soon the island was yielding 2 crops each year, one watered by winter rains, the other irrigated by Poseidon's canals. The rich earth was carpeted with herbs and vegetables, and thick with healing roots. From its depths, men dug out priceless yellow mountain copper. All things flourished on the sacred island. So there was a lot of imagery there. So the one thing that I think the author is trying to do on this page especially is to help you visualize exactly what it is that Poseidon and his wife Cleito are building, okay? And in your head, you're probably forming this kind of picture of maybe this beautiful paradise place where they're all going to live with happiness. And if you look back on the page, there's tons of details that kind of prove that it's a flourishing place and that it's beautiful and that it helps paint a picture. So, page 510. Then, under Poseidon's guidance, the inhabitants built a palace fit for a god, with towers, gates, and parapets trimmed with gleaming brass and tin. In the center, they set up a holy temple dedicated to Poseidon and Cleito, with pinnacles of silver surrounded by a wall of gold. They built thermal baths and aqueducts, fountains, and gardens, and even a huge race course. So this place is obviously turning into this amazing place with a palace, and everybody is happy, and there's lots of money and silver and gold, and they're building these different things like those thermal baths, which the thermal is one of our vocab words, means heat. So it's kind of like a hot tub, okay? Thermal means heat. So if they're building a thermal bath, it's kind of like a hot tub, probably for, Poseidon and his wife to relax, Also, the other one was aqueducts. Aqueducts is a really tricky word, but really it's just like a pipe that brings water, okay, or channels water. So for this, the aqueducts were probably built to bring water to anybody who needed it and who lived there. Usually aqueducts are built to bring water from one place to another, and it has to be like a really far distance. So, for example, the Romans of a long time ago, they built these amazing aqueducts that took water from rivers on mountains down in a long way down to where they lived. So that way it was bringing water to them. And it was really a great invention, the aqueducts. So, and then the other one was guidance. So guidance is when you give helpful advice or give instruction. So right here, it looks like there's a coach with the soccer players, and he's giving them some guidance, which is advice, basically, and he's coaching them. Okay. On page 511, it was a happy time for Poseidon and Cleito, and over the years, Cleito gave birth to 5 pairs of twin sons. So that's 10 boys. Their firstborn son, they named Atlas. In the summer of his 20th year, he was crowned High King, and they named the island Atlantis in his honor. Then Poseidon divided the island into 10 parts and gave his sons 1/10 each. So Poseidon, who is their king, who is the god, is basically divvying out the island to all of his sons, and he's sharing his wealth with them. Okay, page 512. To ensure peace in his new island city, Poseidon set down laws in stone on a pillar of the temple. Chief among them was the commandment that no person should take up arms against another, with a terrible curse on anyone who disobeyed. Every 5 years, Atlas and the 9 princes gathered by night beside the pillar to judge their people according to Poseidon's laws. The people of Atlantis became wise, gentle, and great-spirited. They were sober and kind, as the Creator had always wanted them to be. Above all, they lived in peace. So the last vocab word here is pillar. And this is just a strong, upright support. It's like a beam that holds, something, usually for buildings or structures. So, okay, page 513. So Atlantis prospered. Its splendid docks were thronged with ships and merchandise, and behind them a towering lighthouse lit the way for incoming boats, bringing cargoes from other lands. The harbors hummed with trade. Bridges in an underground canal were built to connect the three circles of land around the mountain, as the people grew ever richer. Poseidon, watching from the waves, was content and went away to his home at the bottom of the sea. Next page. I'm just going to check on my video quick while I have the time. Yep, so we're all right. See, I only have a certain amount of time to fit videos in before it ends up making me do more than one. So we're on page 515. One day, Zeus, god of gods, who ruled according to the law of the Creator, looked down from the heavens above. He saw the city walls crumbling with neglect, the empty temple, and worst of all, people fighting for one another. He roared out his anger. So, after Poseidon left and went to the bottom of the sea, Atlantis kind of suffered because of that. It says that it was neglected, so that means that, it wasn't being taken care of properly. The sounds of his fury woke Poseidon. Rising to the surface of the waves, the sea god looked out over his once perfect kingdom and wept, which means he cried. Now he had no choice. He must carry out his terrible curse. Raising his trident, that's actually that pitchfork thing. Raising his trident, he stirred the seas into a wave that rose so high it lashed the heavens. The wave vibrated with a roar that could be heard 2,000 miles away, and the earth trembled in terror. Gathering its full force, the wave crashed upon the land, while burning rain and ashes blistered down from above. In a single day and night, Atlantis was swallowed up by the sea. Then there was silence. The city sank slowly to its new resting place on the ocean floor. So, of course, this is fictional, right? It's make-believe. But basically what happened is he swirled up the sea as Atlantis was kind of burning and crashing, and the wave took it and moved it all the way to the bottom of the ocean floor where it would stay. It says the people of Atlantis did not die. They continued to exist beneath the waves, but they never spoke or quarreled or fought again. As year followed year, they paid a terrible penance, learning to live without gold or possessions in the cold depths. In time, they became little more than creatures of the water. To this day, Atlantis has never been found. Some people believe that it is still there, under the sea, waiting to be discovered. So, do you think Atlantis could be somewhere beneath the sea? I don't know. Last page. Where was Atlantis? People have suggested many different places where Atlantis might once have been. The oldest Greek legends describe Atlantis being out to the west, in the middle of the ocean that is still named the Atlantic, after Cleito's son. The people of Atlantis are said to have spread to other countries, founding settlements in Europe and Africa, and even in a land we now call America. Some think Atlantis existed more or less as Plato described it, and that its people left traces behind them. Egypt has pyramids. Mexico has pyramids. So perhaps some Atlantean settlers built them in both places, and their submerged homeland was midway between the two countries. Others suggest that Atlantis was closer to America. The native inhabitants of the West Indies told early explorers that their islands were once part of a single landmass but that a disaster long ago shattered it. The 5th century Greek philosopher Proclus, who wanted to convince his readers that Atlantis was real, writes very mysteriously, as if he knew of the West Indies in their story. Some people suggest that Atlantis was a part of Britain. Legends tells of a sunken land between Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. The theory taken most seriously is that the story is actually about the island of Crete, which was a highly civilized and ruled over several smaller islands. That's actually in Greece, by the way. One of them, Thera, was partially destroyed in about 1450 BCE by a tremendous eruption, which also destroyed part of Crete, and its civilization never recovered. With so much uncertainty, some argue that the story of Atlantis is not history at all, but a myth warning us against conflict and power seeking. Yet the legend is so vivid that many will always believe Atlantis existed somewhere. So really, there's all of these different ideas about Atlantis, and is it real? Where is it located? And really, we don't know. So people have all these different ideas, these different myths, but really we aren't sure. But really, the lesson that this story is trying to teach is, don't be greedy. If you get too carried away with riches and gold, then it ends up leading to, a disaster, I guess. And they kind of had to learn their lesson by living at the bottom of the ocean floor. So that was our last story, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. Tomorrow we have our Zoom meeting at 9:30, so I'll see you guys then. And thanks for tuning in. Okay, guys. See you later.